My ex wants to get drinks and catch up. You are obviously not invited. It would be weird.
My fiance said this to me one evening. I said, completely understood. While she was gone, I got ring deposit back, started packing my thing. When she came back home smiling, she asked, "Why are you packed?" I said, "Because we are done effective immediately."
It was an ordinary Wednesday evening, the kind that usually dissolves into the quiet rhythm of shared routines. I was at the sink, rinsing the last of the dinner plates, when Alina wandered into the kitchen and delivered her announcement with the same casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather. She told me Lucas had called her earlier that afternoon. Her ex of 3 years, the man she had dated seriously right before we met, wanted to meet for drinks the following night. He was in town, she explained lightly, and thought it would be nice to catch up. Just two people reconnecting, seeing how life had turned out for the other. She said it with a brightness that suggested this was the most natural, harmless idea imaginable. I set down the dish I was holding and asked her to repeat herself, certain I must have misunderstood. She obliged without hesitation, smiling as though she expected approval. We ended on good terms, she reminded me, as if that detail erased any reason for discomfort. He was curious about her life, she said. She was curious about his, completely innocent, completely casual. Then came the part that sharpened everything. She laughed, actually laughed, when she told me I couldn't come along, not because of scheduling conflicts or practical reasons, but because my presence would make things awkward. She said it would be strange having her fiancé sitting across from her while she talked to an ex about old memories. The suggestion of my attendance wasn't treated as a possibility. It was dismissed outright like an absurd idea that didn't merit discussion. That was when I understood this wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement, a decision already made. I stayed calm. I told her I understood. The reaction she gave me was subtle but unmistakable. For a moment, she seemed almost disappointed that I wasn't challenging her. Then she softened immediately, stepping closer, pressing a kiss against my forehead. She praised my maturity, told me how refreshing it was to be with someone who wasn't insecure or controlling. She contrasted me with hypothetical men who would react with jealousy. Her affection felt less like warmth and more like reward. She kept talking, shifting details without noticing. First it was drinks, then she mentioned coffee. When I pointed out the inconsistency, she waved it away with a quick shrug as though the distinction didn't matter. What mattered, she implied, was trust. The rest of the evening became a quiet performance. From the bedroom, I heard hangers scraping across the closet rod as she tried on outfit after outfit. Fabric rustled, drawers opened and closed. Heels clicked against hardwood floors. She was investing serious energy into preparing for what she insisted was an entirely innocent meeting. Eventually, she emerged wearing a black dress I recognized immediately. It was the same one she had worn on our first date, the night she had laughed easily, touched my arm across the table, and made me believe in beginnings. She spun once and asked how she looked. "Perfect for meeting up with an ex," I said. She beamed, missing the tone entirely. She thanked me, pleased, and returned to adjusting her hair in the mirror. She was so absorbed in her own reflection that she didn't notice the shift in how I spoke to her. She didn't notice that I had stopped using her name. She didn't notice that I was watching her not with admiration, but with clarity. It felt as though a curtain had been pulled aside, revealing something that had been there all along. She left at exactly 7. She told me she would probably be home by 10, maybe 11 if conversation flowed easily. She promised to text me when she was on her way back. She grabbed her purse, her keys, and offered a quick kiss before heading out the door. I listened to the sound of her car starting, then fading into the distance. The apartment settled into silence. I cleared the dinner plates, wiped the counters, and then sat at the table with my laptop. There were a few things I needed to take care of. My first call was to the jewelry store where I had purchased her engagement ring 6 months earlier. The man who answered introduced himself as Robert. I asked about their return policy, keeping my voice steady, detached. He explained that full refunds were available within 90 days if the ring remained in original condition. After that window, they offered store credit or trade-in value. 6 months meant I was outside the refund period. He estimated I could expect to recover about 60 to 70% of the purchase price. I had spent $3,500. The return would be around $2,400. Not ideal, but better than holding onto a symbol that no longer represented what it was meant to. I told him I would stop by the next morning. After ending the call, I turned to something more practical. I began researching tenant regulations. We had been living together in my apartment for a year. The lease was in my name alone. Legally, she was considered a guest. The law required reasonable notice to vacate 30 days. That seemed fair. I mentally cataloged what belonged to whom. The furniture was mine, purchased long before she moved in. Her clothes filled half the closet. Her books lined shelves she had claimed gradually over time. The bathroom counter was crowded with skincare products arranged with careful precision. Evidence of her presence existed everywhere, yet suddenly felt temporary. My phone buzzed. A message from Alina. She had arrived. The place was beautiful, she wrote. Luca's looked good. She added a smiley face at the end. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. The emoji felt deliberate, though I couldn't say why. I did not reply. Instead, I called my friend Victor. He had endured a difficult breakup the previous year and understood the quiet mechanics of endings. I asked if I could stay at his place for a few days. He listened without interruption as I summarized the situation. When I finished, he said it sounded like a test, a power move designed to measure what I would tolerate. I told him I intended to pass, just not in the way she expected. He offered to help me move things the next day and told me I was doing the right thing. After the call, I began packing, nothing dramatic. Just essentials, clothes, toiletries, work materials. I folded items carefully, placing them in a suitcase with deliberate calm. The process felt less like escape and more like preparation. Another message arrived. Alina described how funny Lucas was, how they had laughed about old memories. She added a laughing emoji. She was narrating her evening as if sharing highlights from a casual outing, unaware or unconcerned about how those updates would be received. I almost smiled at the absurdity of it. She was either oblivious to the implications or intentionally provoking a reaction. Neither explanation inspired confidence. I found a cardboard box in the closet and began gathering some of her belongings. Not everything, just enough to begin separating what had been intertwined. Each item placed inside felt like a quiet acknowledgement of reality. Outside, the night continued as usual. Inside, something had shifted permanently. Her presence lingered in objects more than in memory. The jewelry box she left open on the dresser. The framed photos arranged carefully on the nightstand. Her favorite chipped mug by the sink, small, ordinary items that quietly testified she had built a life there. One by one, I gathered them, not angrily, not dramatically, just methodically, like someone restoring order to a room that had drifted out of alignment. By 10:30, I had packed 2 travel bags for myself and filled a medium box with some of her belongings. The apartment already looked different, not empty but clarified, cleaner in a way that had nothing to do with surfaces. It resembled the space I had once known, before it became a shared territory filled with compromise and unspoken concessions. My phone had been silent for nearly an hour. Either she was too engrossed in her evening to check in, or she had finally realized that narrating her reunion with an ex to her fiancé might not be the most considerate idea. I sat on the couch with a beer, letting the quiet settle around me. That same couch had once been the center of our plans. It was where she had said yes when I proposed. Where we had mapped out guest lists, debated honeymoon destinations, imagined years that now felt theoretical. I pictured her returning the next night, curling beside me as if nothing had shifted, but everything had shifted. The only difference was that she hadn't yet seen it. Around 11, I called my sister Monica. She answered on the second ring and immediately asked what was wrong. I rarely called that late unless something significant had happened. I told her everything, the announcement, the dismissal, the preparation, the silence afterward. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, I could almost hear her sigh through the phone. She said it was about time I recognized what had been in front of me, not harshly, but plainly. She reminded me of moments I had dismissed before. The argument last Christmas, when Alina insisted we skip dinner with my family so she could attend a party with her friends. The afternoon she redecorated my apartment without asking, replacing furniture and colors as though my preferences were optional. The way she had begun making decisions about our wedding, venue, guest list, timeline, while treating my input as a courtesy rather than a necessity. Monica said I had mistaken accommodation for harmony. She offered to come help pack the rest of Alina's things, but I declined. This was something I needed to complete on my own. When we ended the call, I felt less alone, but more certain. A few minutes later, Victor called again. He asked if I was sure I wanted to move forward tonight. Maybe I should sleep on it, he suggested. Give myself time to cool off. I told him I had been sleeping on it for months without realizing that was what I was doing. Tonight wasn't a reaction, it was a conclusion. He reminded me his couch was available for as long as I needed it. Then he asked what I planned to say when she returned. I told him I would tell her the truth. That respect wasn't negotiable. That I wouldn't marry someone who believed meeting an ex for drinks and providing live updates about it was appropriate behavior for a committed partner. Victor asked whether I was certain I wanted to call it a date. I asked him what else he would call 2 people who once shared intimacy, dressing up to meet alone, reminiscing over drinks, laughing about old times. He paused, then admitted it sounded exactly like a date when described that way. What unsettled me most was not the meeting itself, but her assumption that I would accept it unquestioningly, as though compliance had been established, rehearsed, expected. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed boundaries to blur until they barely existed. I had mistaken patience for partnership, flexibility for understanding. That realization stung because it felt true. I walked through the apartment once more, ensuring everything I needed was gathered. The lease was in my name. The utilities were in my name. She had moved into my space, my routines, my daily life. Now she could move out of them. At 11:47, my phone vibrated again, a message from her. She was heading home. She thanked me for being so cool about the evening. She told me she loved me. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. She would arrive expecting normalcy. Instead, she would find clarity. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a lamp glowing in the living room. My bags were placed neatly by the door. The box containing her belongings sat centered on the coffee table. The engagement ring rested in its original case beside it. Everything was arranged with intention. There would be no shouting, no spectacle, only conversation. Her car pulled into the parking lot at exactly midnight. I heard the engine shut off, then the measured rhythm of her heels against pavement. She moved unhurriedly, perhaps checking her phone, perhaps replaying her evening. I remained seated steady, waiting. The key turned in the lock. She entered humming softly, her voice light with lingering happiness. She called out to ask if I was still awake. When she stepped into the living room, she was radiant. Her hair was slightly undone, her lipstick gone, her expression relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. It was the kind of brightness that comes from shared laughter, from attention received and returned. Then her eyes landed on the bags, the box. The ring case, her smile faded gradually like a light dimming. She asked what everything meant, attempting to keep her tone casual. I asked her to sit down. She hesitated, scanning the room, searching for context. What happened? She asked. Is something wrong? Yes, I said calmly. Our relationship ended. She laughed nervously, assuming exaggeration. She pointed out she had only been gone 4 hours. I told her nothing had happened during those hours. That was precisely the point. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, but only partially, perched on the edge as though prepared to stand again. She said she didn't understand, that we had been fine that morning. That I had told her I understood about her meeting Lucas. I did understand, I said, completely. She asked what the problem was. I explained that my fiancé had spent the evening dressed for a reunion with a former partner, alone, sharing drinks and memories, and believed that was appropriate behavior within an engagement. She immediately objected. It wasn't a date, she insisted. They were simply friends who shared history. I told her plainly that these so-called friends had dressed for the occasion, met for drinks, and exchanged compliments about how good each of them looked. The words seemed to land harder than I expected. Her cheeks flushed, and she insisted I was misinterpreting her message. I asked, as calmly as I could, what the correct interpretation was supposed to be. She said she had only been friendly, enthusiastic about reconnecting with someone from her past, and that she thought I would appreciate her honesty. That part nearly made me laugh. She genuinely believed that sharing running commentary about her evening, especially praise about how attractive her ex appeared, was transparency, rather than insensitivity. She stood up abruptly and began pacing across the living room. Her movements were animated, her hands describing shapes in the air, as though she could rearrange the situation through sheer motion. She conceded that perhaps she could have handled the texting differently. Maybe she should have been more considerate, more mindful. But ending an engagement over what she called something this small was, in her words, an extreme and irrational reaction. I rose as well, not to match her intensity, but because the conversation demanded presence. I told her the issue wasn't small. The issue was respect, boundaries, consideration. She had made a decision that directly affected our relationship, without once pausing to consider how it might feel from my side of the engagement. She responded quickly, reminding me that I had said I was fine with her meeting him. That had been my choice, she argued. I had given my approval. I told her I had said I understood, because I wanted to observe what she would do when given the opportunity to demonstrate judgment. I wanted to see whether she would recognize that meeting an ex alone, preparing for the evening with unusual care, and then sharing admiration for him afterward, crossed a line for someone planning a wedding in 6 months. She stopped pacing and stared at me. So this was a test, she asked, disbelief sharpening her tone. No, I said, this was you showing me who you are when you assume I'll accept anything. She shook her head, rejecting that conclusion as unfair. I told her what was unfair was being engaged to someone who considered her ex-boyfriend's comfort more important than her fiancé's trust. She immediately denied that she had prioritized anyone else's feelings. I reminded her of her own explanation for why I couldn't attend. It would be awkward. Awkward for who? I asked. She hesitated, and for the first time that night, she seemed to search carefully for an answer rather than react. Finally, she admitted that it would have been awkward for him. For everyone, she added quickly, but mostly for him. That admission lingered in the room like a truth she hadn't intended to reveal. I told her that was exactly the point. Somewhere beneath her reasoning, she had known the situation carried implications beyond a simple reunion. If it had truly been harmless, my presence would not have complicated anything. She would not have needed to protect anyone's comfort. Her posture softened. She sat down again, the energy draining from her shoulders. In a quieter voice, she asked whether I was really prepared to discard 2 years together because she had dinner with someone from her past. I corrected her gently but firmly. She had said drinks to me, but dinner slipped out when she spoke about him. The distinction mattered because inconsistency mattered. She grew frustrated, accusing me of dissecting every word. I explained that I was paying attention to details that revealed intention. I reminded her how she had planned her outfit since the previous evening, how she had shown more excitement about this meeting than about anything we had done together in months, how she had never asked whether I was comfortable with the arrangement, only informed me I would not be included. Silence followed. She stared at the box of her belongings as though it might provide explanation or absolution. When she spoke again, her voice was subdued. She said she hadn't realized it would become such a significant issue. She hadn't anticipated this reaction. That, I told her, is exactly the problem. You didn't consider my perspective at all. You assumed acceptance before discussion. She asked what happened next. The question was simple, but heavy, like a door opening onto unfamiliar ground. I picked up the ring box and extended it toward her. I told her that what happened next depended on who she chose to be, and that I had already decided what kind of marriage I was willing to enter. She stared at the box as though it might move on its own. Her hands trembled slightly when she finally took it. She asked if I was truly ending everything. She asked if one evening was enough to dismantle a future. I told her it wasn't about one evening. It was about a pattern that had become impossible to ignore. Tonight had simply clarified what had been building quietly for a long time. She asked where she was supposed to go. The practical question felt stark after so much emotion. I explained that legally she had 30 days to make arrangements. Her name was not on the lease, and I was formally giving notice. The apartment was mine, just as the responsibility for her choices was hers. She looked around slowly, as though seeing the space from a distance for the first time. She whispered that she couldn't believe I was doing this to us. I told her gently that I wasn't doing anything to us. The outcome had begun the moment she decided that maintaining an evening with her ex was more important than protecting the boundaries of our relationship. I picked up my bags and moved toward the door. I told her I would return Sunday afternoon to collect the rest of my belongings, and that it would be best if she used the time to decide on her next steps. She stood, still holding the ring box, and asked if we could talk again when I wasn't so angry. I told her I wasn't angry. Anger burns quickly and fades. What I felt was disappointment, and disappointment has weight. It settles deeper and lasts longer. At the threshold, I looked back one final time. She stood alone in the center of what had once been our shared living space, holding the symbol of a promise that no longer existed, surrounded by plans that had dissolved into uncertainty. I told her quietly that I hoped she and Lucas found whatever they were searching for. Then I closed the door behind me and walked away from what I recognized, finally, as a decision I should have made much earlier. Victor's couch was more comfortable than I expected. The unfamiliar space carried none of the tension that had filled my own apartment for weeks. I slept deeply that night, no restless thoughts, no rehearsed conversations, no lingering doubt. Just uninterrupted rest. In the morning, the smell of coffee and bacon drifted through the apartment. Victor was already dressed for work, moving through his routine with easy familiarity. He asked how I had slept. I told him it was the best rest I had experienced in months. He handed me a mug of coffee and studied my expression for a moment. "Any regrets?" he asked. I considered the question honestly, allowing space for uncertainty if it existed. But clarity had replaced hesitation. I told him I had none. He studied my face over the rim of his coffee mug and said I looked different, lighter, like someone had quietly lifted a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. He wasn't wrong. There was a calm where tension used to live, a clarity I hadn't realized I was missing until it arrived. My phone, however, told a different story. It had buzzed relentlessly through the night, 19 missed calls, 14 voicemails, 48 text messages, a digital storm waiting to be opened. I hadn't listened to a single one yet. For the first time in months, silence felt like a choice instead of avoidance. At work, I immersed myself in a project that had been sitting untouched for weeks. The kind of assignment that requires concentration, but rewards you with structure when everything else feels chaotic. numbers, timelines, concrete goals. They were refreshingly predictable. My coworker Jessica noticed the shift almost immediately. She paused beside my desk and remarked that I seemed unusually focused, more present than I had been in a long time. I told her I was sorting through some personal matters and left it at that. She nodded with the kind of understanding that doesn't require details. Around 3 in the afternoon, I finally pressed play on the voicemails. The first ones were apologetic, soft voices, careful phrasing, a tone that suggested regret without accountability. That quickly gave way to frustration, then anger, then desperation. It was a familiar progression, almost formulaic. She said she couldn't believe I was overreacting. She said I was discarding everything we had built together over something insignificant. She mentioned that her mother thought I was experiencing some kind of emotional breakdown. That part almost impressed me for its creativity. Then came the detail that made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my office. Lucas had messaged her to check whether we were okay, because I had seemed upset the night before. Lucas, concerned observer. Lucas, suddenly invested. The irony was impossible to ignore. The text messages mirrored the voicemails, apologies intertwined with accusations, responsibility diluted by rationalizations. But one message stood apart from the rest. It had been sent at 3:17 in the morning, a time when honesty often slips through defenses. She wrote that she had called Lucas after everything happened. According to her, he had assumed they were broken up based on how she behaved during the evening. He said she had been flirting with him throughout their time together. He said he was confused about why she would meet him that way if she was engaged. She ended the message with a quiet admission that maybe I had been right about certain things. I read that message 3 times, letting its implications settle. Even Lucas had recognized what I had recognized. He had perceived signals she either didn't notice or chose not to acknowledge. I forwarded the message to Victor with a brief note. Even her ex thought it was a date. He responded immediately, his reply blunt and unsurprised. She had in effect confirmed everything without intending to. By Friday afternoon, I returned to the apartment to collect more of my belongings. The space felt altered the moment I stepped inside. It seemed smaller, quieter, as though something essential had been removed. Evidence of her grief was everywhere, crumpled tissues on the table, a glass of water left untouched, curtains drawn against the daylight. She sat at the kitchen table wearing pajamas despite the hour. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair unkempt, her posture heavy with exhaustion. She greeted me softly. I returned the greeting and moved toward the bedroom to gather clothes. She asked if we could talk. I told her we could talk while I packed. She followed me and sat on the edge of the bed watching as I folded shirts and placed them carefully into a bag. After a long silence, she said she had been thinking about everything I'd said. She believed she understood now why I had been hurt. I acknowledged the statement without pausing my movements. She told me she had spoken with Lucas again, and that he had said things that forced her to see the situation differently. I asked what he had said. She explained that he believed she had behaved as though she were single, that her actions had given him the impression their relationship status had changed. He had been confused, she said, about why she would meet him that way if she intended to marry someone else. I told her he sounded perceptive. She hesitated before continuing, as though gathering courage. She said he had also told her she sent mixed signals all evening, that she seemed open to something happening between them. I stopped folding and looked at her directly. I asked whether she had wanted that. She answered that she didn't know. The honesty was unexpected. I had prepared for denial, for explanation, for minimization. I had not prepared for uncertainty spoken aloud. She said she had replayed the evening repeatedly in her mind, trying to reconstruct her words, her expressions, the tone of her laughter. The more she reflected, the more she suspected that she hadn't simply been reconnecting with an old acquaintance. She began to cry quietly, not dramatically, just tears falling steadily. She said she thought she had been testing something, testing whether feelings remained, whether she still had influence, whether she could still provoke interest. She admitted she had enjoyed the attention. She had liked feeling desired by someone who did not yet take her presence for granted. I sat on the opposite side of the bed, leaving space between us, close enough to speak calmly without raising my voice. I asked why she was telling me all of this. She said she owed the truth to me and to herself. She said she was trying to understand why she had made a decision that now seemed reckless even to her. I asked what conclusions she had reached. She wiped her eyes and remained silent for a long time. Finally, she said she believed she had begun taking me for granted. She had grown comfortable with the assumption that I would remain regardless of her choices. That certainty, she admitted, had made her careless. She said she thought she might also have been feeling confined by that certainty. I asked what she meant by confined. She said she had begun to wonder whether she was settling too quickly, whether there were possibilities she had not explored. The words hung in the room with undeniable weight. This was a conversation that should have happened long before a proposal, long before wedding plans, long before commitments became tangible. I asked whether she had used Lucas to explore those possibilities. She said she hadn't intended to, but acknowledged that it was effectively what had happened. I finished packing and closed my bag. I told her I appreciated her honesty. She asked whether it changed anything. I looked around the room we had shared, the bed where we had imagined our future, the photographs that documented happier moments, the closet where empty spaces now marked my absence. I told her it changed everything and nothing at the same time. She asked me to explain. I said her honesty clarified what had been uncertain. It confirmed that the problem was not misunderstanding, but misalignment. It also didn't alter the reality that trust, once fractured in this way, cannot be restored by explanation alone. Understanding why something happens does not erase its impact, it simply removes illusion. She lowered her gaze, absorbing the words without argument. The room was quiet, except for the faint sound of traffic outside. I picked up my bag and moved toward the door, aware that this conversation, though difficult, had provided something essential, clarity, for both of us. After a moment, she said she had found somewhere to stay. A friend of hers, Amanda, had offered a spare room, temporary, just until she figured out her next step. Her voice was calm but tired, as if every word required effort. I told her that sounded like a good arrangement. She said she planned to move out completely by next weekend. I told her that was fine. There was no anger left in my voice, only a strange neutrality that surprised even me. I picked up my bag and started toward the door. Behind me, she spoke again, her voice quieter than before. She said that for whatever it was worth, she knew she had made mistakes. She knew she had hurt me. And she believed I was doing what was right, even if it hurt both of us. I paused at the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, and told her I believed she was doing what she needed to do as well. It was the first honest acknowledgement we had shared, that perhaps we had never been right for each other, that something we had tried to shape into permanence had always been slightly misaligned. Maybe we had both sensed it long before we admitted it. Maybe fear, habit, or hope had simply kept us from naming it. She asked if I would be okay. I answered yes, and the certainty in my voice surprised me. For the first time since everything had begun unraveling, I knew the answer was true. 3 months later, I stood in my apartment and noticed how different the space felt. It wasn't just quieter, it felt intentional, as though every object existed because I had chosen it. The rooms no longer carried echoes of compromise. I had replaced the old couch with one I actually liked, painted the bedroom a color that felt calm instead of neutral, and filled the windowsills with plants I had somehow managed to keep alive. The apartment felt less like a shared arrangement and more like a reflection. Victor showed up that Saturday morning with coffee and donuts, a habit we had developed without discussion. He walked in, glanced around, and declared that I looked almost offensively well-adjusted. I thanked him for the assessment. He said he meant it. When everything had fallen apart, he had expected months of emotional wreckage. Instead, he said I seemed unnervingly composed, like someone who had found clarity rather than loss. I thought about that while drinking my coffee. The first week after leaving had been difficult, but not for the reasons most people assumed. I hadn't missed her presence so much as I had questioned my own judgment. I wondered if I had reacted too strongly, if I had been too rigid, if patience might have changed the outcome. But those questions gradually faded. With distance came perspective, and with perspective came certainty. I told Victor that I believed I had simply stopped pretending to be someone else. He asked what that meant. I explained that for 2 years I had been trying to be the version of myself that avoided conflict at any cost, the version that prioritized harmony over honesty, the version that tolerated discomfort to preserve stability. Once I stopped being that person, everything else aligned naturally. Decisions became simpler when I no longer negotiated with my own boundaries. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from Monica asking if I could meet her for lunch. She said she had news. When I arrived downtown, she greeted me with barely contained excitement. She made me promise not to react strangely to what she was about to say, which only made me more curious. She told me she had run into Alina at the grocery store the day before. Hearing the name felt distant, almost abstract. It was strange how someone who had once occupied so much emotional space could now feel like a chapter already closed. Monica said Alina had asked how I was doing, whether I seemed happy, whether I was seeing anyone. I asked what she had told her. Monica said she told the truth, that I was doing well, better than well, actually. Then she added that Alina had mentioned she and Lucas were officially together. I considered that information calmly while finishing my sandwich. I waited for an emotional reaction that never arrived. No anger, no validation. No disappointment, just neutrality. I told Monica that I hoped things worked out for them. She looked at me as though expecting something more dramatic. When none came, she asked whether I felt vindicated. I told her vindication had nothing to do with it. My decision hadn't been about Lucas specifically. It had been about what that situation revealed about compatibility, values, and mutual respect. Monica studied me carefully, as though searching for evidence of hidden emotion. She said she expected at least a hint of smug satisfaction. I laughed and told her there was nothing satisfying about discovering a relationship wasn't right, only relief in recognizing it before it went further. After lunch, I walked through downtown without any particular destination. The past few months had unfolded quietly, but significantly. I had immersed myself in work and earned a promotion to senior project manager. I had reconnected with friends I had unintentionally drifted away from. I had begun exercising regularly, not out of obligation, but because I enjoyed the routine. I even took a spontaneous weekend trip to visit my cousin in Seattle, simply because the idea appealed to me. For the first time in years, my life felt entirely self-directed. That evening, I was reading on my couch when a knock sounded at my door around 9. Through the peephole, I saw Elena standing in the hallway holding a large manila envelope. I opened the door, but remained in the doorway. She said she had found some mail and a few small items that belonged to me while unpacking at her new place. I told her she could have left them with the building manager, but she said she had hoped we could talk. Against better judgment, I stepped aside and allowed her in. She looked around slowly, taking in the changes. She said the place looked different, more defined somehow. I thanked her. She handed me the envelope and sat on the couch without asking. After a pause, she asked whether Monica had mentioned that she and Lucas were together now. I told her I had heard. She nodded and said they had started seeing each other about 2 weeks after we separated. Her tone carried neither pride nor apology, only a matter-of-fact acceptance. The room remained quiet as the reality of that timeline settled between us, not as a revelation, but as confirmation of something that no longer required interpretation. I opened the envelope and began sorting through its contents with deliberate care, as if the simple act of organizing paper could keep the moment from becoming something heavier. Inside were ordinary things: an unopened bank statement, a magazine I had forgotten I subscribed to, a birthday card that had arrived too late to matter. Nothing urgent, nothing significant. Just the quiet remnants of a shared address that no longer existed. Without looking up, I asked whether she was trying to make a point or provoke a reaction. There was no accusation in my tone, only curiosity. She said she wasn't trying to do either. She said she was trying to apologize. That answer made me pause. I set the papers down and really looked at her for the first time since she had arrived. Something about her presence felt diminished, not physically, but emotionally. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly seemed replaced by uncertainty, as though she were occupying a smaller version of herself. I asked what specifically she was apologizing for. She drew a slow breath before answering. For everything, she said, for that night with Lucas, for lying to me and to herself about what she had been doing, for the damage she caused. For what she called wasting 2 years of my life. I shook my head slightly and told her she hadn't wasted my time. The relationship had cost something, yes, but it had also given me clarity I would not have gained otherwise. She asked what I meant by that, and her voice carried genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness. I leaned back slightly and chose my words carefully. I told her I learned where my boundaries truly were. I learned what respect looks like, not as a concept, but as a daily practice. I learned the difference between patience and self-erasure, between compromise and quiet resentment. I learned that peace in a relationship cannot come at the expense of self-respect. Those weren't wasted years. They were expensive lessons, but they were valuable. She listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, as if each word confirmed something she had already begun to suspect. After a moment, she said Lucas had told her about the conversation he and I had that night, about how he had perceived her behavior, how obvious it had seemed from the outside. I said he had been honest, and I respected that honesty. She added that he told her I handled everything with more composure than he would have. I gave a small shrug and said it was good to know. Silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. She remained seated, her hands folded loosely in her lap, as though gathering the courage to say something else. I sensed she wanted guidance and opening a prompt, but I offered none. Some realizations need to arrive without assistance. Eventually, she asked whether I had ever wondered what might have happened if she had not gone out with him that night. The question lingered in the room like a fragile object. I answered simply, no. She pressed gently, asking if I had truly never considered it. I told her that if it had not been that specific night, it would have been another moment, another circumstance, another test of the same underlying issue. That evening had not created the problem, it had revealed it. She had shown me something essential about herself, and I had chosen to believe what I saw. She said my perspective sounded harsh. I told her it was not harsh, it was honest. Honesty often sounds severe when it replaces hope. She stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the quiet parking lot below. Her voice when she spoke again was softer than before. She said she thought she had made a mistake. I asked which one. After a pause, she said, letting me go. For a moment, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the same reflexive pull that used to make me question my own decisions whenever she expressed regret. But instead of leaning into that sensation, I observed it, recognized it. It was not love or longing, it was habit, a reflex shaped by years of wanting resolution more than truth. I told her calmly that she had not let me go. I had left, she had made a choice that night, and I had made one in response. She chose attention elsewhere. I chose myself. She asked whether things could be different if she made a different choice now. I told her that decisions still matter when they arrive, but timing matters too. Some choices lose their meaning when they come after consequences have already reshaped everything. She turned toward me again, tears visible but restrained. She said she assumed I hated her. I told her I didn't hate her. Hatred requires emotional investment. What I felt was absence, no anger, no resentment, no attachment, just distance. She said that sounded worse than hate. I told her it was simply honest. She wiped her eyes and moved toward the door. Before leaving, she said she hoped I would someday find someone who appreciated what kind of person I was. I told her I already had. She paused, her hand resting on the doorknob, and asked who. I answered that I had found that person in myself. After she left, I locked the door and returned to my book. Through the window, I heard her car start and fade into the distance. This time, there was no lingering tension, no unfinished emotion, only quiet certainty. I considered reaching out to Victor or Monica to tell them about the visit, but the impulse passed. Not everything requires narration. Some moments are complete simply by being experienced. Some endings do not need witnesses. Months earlier, I would have replayed every word of that conversation, analyzing tone, searching for alternate outcomes, questioning whether I had been too firm or not firm enough. That night, I simply turned the page and kept reading. For the first time in years, I felt entirely aligned with my own life, no compromises, no quiet resentments, no internal negotiations. I understood what I required from connection, and I understood that solitude was not absence but stability. Until I encountered a relationship grounded naturally in mutual respect, without testing, convincing, or diminishing, I was content in my own company. It turned out the strongest partnership I had ever built was the one I cultivated within myself.